The other thing I think that is growing in importance in the way that we might be engaging young people in seeing the world and ourselves and developing better understanding is through field design, to understand field theory, to understand things as constituting fields first, fields of energy, fields of exchange, fields of transformation, before we think of material objects in that world. And I think Attila Grandpierre, who was actually an astrophysicist, in fact, in Hungary, has excellent things to say about field theory and field consciousness. I'll just quote this brief thing I've underlined here, that the organization of an organism involves fields, which are the only means to make a simultaneous tuning of the different subsystems of the organism as a whole. Fields with their ability to comprehend the whole organism are the natural basis of a global interaction between organisms and of collective consciousness. And I think so field theory is really important, what we're wanting to deal with. I have to say, I don't need to say it to anyone here, but there is always to be issued in any educational enterprise now a reductionist alert, because the artists, unlike other practitioners of different intellectual and practical persuasions in the world, is prepared to look anywhere, as you know, into any discipline, scientific or spiritual, any view of the world, however esoteric or arcane, any culture, immediate or distant in space or time. We will go anywhere. Our curriculum, such as that might be a fixed entity in education now, which I would question, our curriculum must reflect that flexibility, in my view. I'd like to be a little historical, if I can, very briefly, because cybernetics has been hugely important to me. I've just had an exhibition in Korea reviewing all the work that I've been involved in, and it brought it back to me how central to me from the start has been cybernetics and how continuingly useful it is as an instrument. And it goes back really for me when we're talking about educational ventures, not to the Bauhaus, which of course preceded all this, but to Fun Palace. The Fun Palace of the 60s in London was set up by a theatre director called Joan Littlewood, working with perhaps Britain's finest paper architect, Cedric Price, and informed by one of the leading cyberneticians in the world, Gordon Pask. And the idea was to create a university of the streets, a 24-hour university you could get to by air, sea, or land, that would deal with all kinds of inputs, all kinds of people, all kinds of layers and levels of knowledge in a structure which was itself adaptable, changeable, and interactive. Of course, the mafia didn't put up money for it in the end. It didn't get built, but it did set in train, certainly for me, a number of other people, lots of thinking about how the replacement of the university might take place. Of course, at the same time, Heinz von Forster is very important in our thinking. I'm sure you all acknowledge it. This is just to recognize that, because without this idea in cybernetics of second-order cybernetics, the subjectivity that's involved in cybernetics, rather than this white-coated scientist sort of looking out at the world and analyzing it, realizing that he or she is the very world that is being analyzed. So that's really an important step forward. One of my first publications tried to look at the issues which I thought the sort of matrix, really, within which our thinking about education and art, creativity and educative place, looking at questions of behavior, identity, chance, change, process and system, interaction, transformation. I set up a school in the 60s in London called, or a course really called the Ground Course, a 2-year course, and it was just trying to look at how we might construct change and how we might elicit creativity. I can't go into that in any great depth, and I know that others here will be speaking a little bit about some aspects of this as well. But everything was to turn the classical curriculum on its head. So we developed tools, designed ways in which the mind could be examined, the relationship between behavior and environment could be explored, the way that identity could be created, and how this might be incorporated in various kinds of games and structures. I can't go on in great depth about that. But those principles of behavior, of identity, of process informed what we were doing. Of course, at the same time, in the 60s particularly, came into the consciousness of art just at the moment, at the end of that decade, that the computer was beginning vaguely to become available, or certainly come into the consciousness of artists, came also ideas from quantum physics. Very interesting point where the physicists, certainly in the Copenhagen interpretation, were talking about the way that the physicist smashes through the plate glass that separates us from reality, and in reaching out to it, changes it. To measure it creates the world, that we're involved in a radical constructivism.